Joining me now is the author of international bestsellers, including his latest on democracies and death cults. Douglas Murray, I'm interested in your thoughts on the significance of Charlie Kirk's legacy to American political life and the wider culture. But let's start with the UN, and President Donald Trump addressed the United Nations General Assembly earlier today. And he criticised European allies over everything from green energy obsessions to immigration policies. And the UN itself didn't escape scrutiny either.
What is the purpose of the United Nations? The UN has such tremendous potential. It's empty words, and empty words don't solve war. The only thing that solves war and wars is action.
Douglas, have you also wondered what is the point of the UN?
Well, many people have wondered about that for many decades now. It's some 40 years ago or so since American ambassadors have said very similar things. The problem for the UN has always been that the number of democracies in the world show up. They tend to get castigated by the non-democracies in the world. The free countries get lambasted by unfree countries, and everyone has to pretend that say, you know, an elected leader in a democracy is on an even pegging with some thuggish dictator from somewhere else in the world. And of course, you know, that's a sort of nicety. Unfortunately, a lot of people fall into the trap of believing that as a result, the UN is what it says it is and is the sort of ultimate court of the world. And, you know, while some things can be hashed out there, I have always thought that it is important that democratically elected leaders of countries like the US do things like Trump did today and call out the UN's failings. Otherwise, it's just a sort of talking shop for demagogues and dictators to launder their reputations in New York City.
Now, the president had this to say about mass migration, including illegal immigration and economic migrants seeking asylum.
Proud nations must be allowed to protect their communities and prevent their societies from being overwhelmed by people they have never seen before, with different customs, religions, with different everything. Where migrants have violated laws, lodged false asylum claims, or claimed refugee status.
Douglas, he's talking about essentially what you wrote about so many years ago, the strange death of Europe.
Yes, a book which is, of course, not just about Europe, but about America, Canada, Australia, all the Western liberal democracies, all of which have had more than a generation of insane immigration policies, and which have just not been able to wrestle their way out of the problem that generations actually of politicians have got us into, of all political parties. What Trump said is completely true, and of course will go down like a cup of cold sick with almost all of his allies, because, you know, governments like those in Australia and Britain and so on do this thing of like talking endlessly about our openness and our diversity and so on. And Trump made one of the observations that, yes, I mean, I've made for many years, which is why is it only the Western democracies that have to undergo this? Why is it that we're not allowed to defend our own borders? Why are we not allowed to have our own customs and culture, but instead only define ourselves by our diversity and much more? And as you and I have said before, Rita, one of the historic things which Trump is showing, and if he can pull it off with Homan and others, then it'll be really seismic, is to show that the illegal migration and the dissolution of Western cultures is not inevitable. That you can actually have an orderly migration policy, you can have borders, you can defend those borders, you can have laws, you can have asylum policies, but you can have none of those things if you've decided that basically anyone who walks into your country illegally has the right to stay and enjoy all the benefits of being in these countries, despite, in most cases, not having contributed anything to them and not being likely to contribute anything meaningful to them either. Yes, what he said was completely true, and doubtless, as I say, all of his allies will abhor his comments and think how incredibly backward President Trump is to voice such sentiments, whereas in actual fact, in the rotation that politics can often be, the rotating game that politics can often be, maybe Donald Trump is the voice from the future on all this.
And finally, on President Trump's UN address, he blasted countries, including France, Britain, Australia, for recognising Palestine. He said, Douglas, that effectively rewards the terrorism we saw on October 7.
Yeah. Well, he's completely right about that. Hamas has, of course, already thanked Keir Starmer and others for saying that they recognize a state of Palestine. It's pure posturing by Albanese, Carney, Starmer, Macron. As I've said to you before, Rita, after all, I mean, I think the era where heads of state in Britain and France and so on can create and carve out states in far-off continents is over. I think most people, particularly from the political left, were rather pleased that's over. These unilateral declarations of recognition of statehood are totally meaningless for a whole pile of reasons. But just to list some of them in short order, there is no agreed state of Palestine. There is no agreed Palestinian leadership. There are no agreed borders. There are no agreed. There's no agreed capital. There's no agreement on what land swaps or anything else would look like. And there's no evidence from what Palestinian leadership exists, whether in Gaza with the remains of Hamas or with Judea and Samaria with the Palestinian Authority. There's no evidence at all that they're remotely willing to live in peace with their neighbors. And of course, Hamas see this as a victory. They invaded Israel almost 2 years ago and massacred and raped and kidnapped their way across the south. And within under 2 years, all of these Western governments that said they would stand with the victims, they would stand with Israel, they would demand the release of the hostages, have done next to nothing to get the hostages out, done next to nothing to stop Hamas for the last 20 or more years, and instead now have given this unilateral declaration, which simply rewards the terrorists. I mean, they could have at least said, we are not even going to think about recognizing a so-called Palestinian state until every hostage that Hamas stole is taken from where they're being held and returned to their families. And until that, nothing. They couldn't even hold that line. So we've all seen who they are, all these Macrons and Albaneses and things. And the final thing to say on that is Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, was completely right when he said in the aftermath of President Trump's address, he was completely right, Rubio, when he said all these leaders, Australia, Canada, Britain, France, they're not doing this because they can create a Palestinian state. They can't. They're doing it for domestic political reasons, because people like Albanese think that they can stop the protests and mollify the radical Palestinianists in their own countries if they do this. You know what? They can't. But look at the lesson that Italy has showed us. Giorgia Meloni didn't join in this idiotic and hollow stampede. And there were riots yesterday in Milan as a result, with crowds of immigrants and Palestinianist activists, far leftists, smashing up shops in Milan because Meloni wouldn't do this baloney act of pretending that she can create a Palestinian state. So that's all that these other Western leaders have done. They've done it to mollify the mobs at home. And, well, maybe they think they'll buy themselves peace for a few minutes, but I wouldn't bet on it.
Now, Douglas, we're coming to you from Charlie Kirk's beloved Phoenix, where he headquartered Turning Point USA, and where his funeral was held on Sunday. It was an incredible event on so many levels. How did you see the memorial, and what do you see as Charlie's lasting legacy?
Well, I think it's really the beginning of that legacy. A number of the speakers at the memorial on Sunday in Phoenix made reference to the fact that, you know, the assassin who killed Charlie thought that he was going to silence him, and it's exactly the opposite. He's given Charlie's voice a wider range than it ever could have had. in his lifetime. It's an extraordinary thing, and a demonstration that people who use violence to pursue political means should, among many other things, apart from the fact that it's evil, not do that, because the consequences may well be ones that they cannot foresee. I thought it was extremely moving. It was a remarkable demonstration of solidarity and support from tens of thousands of people, of course, dominated by Charlie Kirk's widow, Erica, and her remarkable speech. But I also think, Rita, as you've noticed as well, that really one of the striking things was the prominence of the Christian message at the heart of it all. Many of us are used to sort of watered down forms of Christianity, particularly in the Western democracies. And this wasn't that. It was literally preaching of the gospel by, Secretary of War Pete Hegseth, by Secretary of State Marco Rubio and others. And I think that legacy is going to be one of the most powerful that Charlie Kirk has not just left behind, but started.
Do you see that as important in fighting back for Western values and reaffirming those Judeo-Christian values?
Well, it's something I wrote about a lot in The Strange Death of Europe a decade ago, as you mentioned, which is that we are in a complicated place in the history of the West, because what we enjoy and our rights and our liberties and much more come from our Judeo-Christian roots. There's no doubt about that. And anyone who says otherwise is simply trying to retrofit the multicultural model onto our societies. Our liberties and our rights and much more, our freedoms, come from a very specific and unusual, in many ways, religious theological tradition. And the question, as the former Pope Benedict, then Cardinal Ratzinger, pointed out, was whether or not Western civilization can survive if it cuts itself off from the roots that gave it birth. That's a question which many people have mulled over in recent years. And in some ways, it's been answered, which is no, that if you completely cut yourself off from your religious roots in the Judeo-Christian West, you end up with weird new wacko religions being founded, whether it's Palestinianism or transgenderism or all of these look at me-isms. And you just sort of create this vacuum into which strange new heresies and beliefs wander. So it's an open question in the West whether there is another way, or whether the way back is the one that Pope Benedict talked about, the one that Charlie Kirk obviously believed in, which is that the West should return to its roots. That's a very complicated issue for society, but it's certainly one that we should think about and engage in. And that is a challenge for everyone, I think, believers, non-believers alike, which is whether or not we can recognize the source that has given us what is good in our societies, or whether we just repudiate it, reject it, and see where the winds blow us.
Beautifully said. Now, you wrote about the violence we are seeing in the US from elements of the left who, you argue, have a history of celebrating or excusing those guilty of these acts of political violence. And on that, we've also had President Trump designating Antifa as a terrorist organisation. I know you wrote about that also for the New York Post. Do you think Antifa deserve to be labelled terrorists? And please just expand on what you're talking about as far as elements of the left having a very permissive attitude to violence.
Well, I would play it any other way around, that if there was a group, whether organized at a normal structural level or a sort of slightly more amorphous blob of entities across the country, if there was such a movement that came from the political right, which, for instance, had spent years smashing up federal buildings and privately owned businesses, which has spent years firing guns on the streets, attacking police officers, attacking journalists, and hospitalizing, almost killing journalists who look into their activities, I think that this thing would have been shut down years ago. And Antifa has been allowed to run because too many people have taken it at its word that it is an anti-fascist organization. It isn't. It's a fascist organization. You can tell literally from the way they behave. They dress up in black, they mask their faces, and they beat their opponents to a pulp on the ground in American cities. I think that there's a question as to whether or not Donald Trump, in America you could designate them a terrorist organization. But the one thing you can absolutely do is use the powers of the state to arrest people who are routinely breaking the law and making life unlivable in the American cities which they dominate in, places like Portland, places in recent years like Seattle and parts of California and elsewhere. It's a very big challenge, but it's one that I think the Trump administration should rise itself to the moment on. As for the wider pool, Rita, it's just very striking to me. And as I said in that City Journal piece, again, you've just got to play it the other way around. There are people who engage in political violence from all sides. But I think it would be surprising if somebody, for instance, involved in terrorism, right-wing terrorism, would find themselves lauded on American campuses and given berths and speaking appointments and much more. And I mentioned there in passing Angela Davis and her own history of radicalism. And she was just honored by Cambridge University in England with an honorary degree. And this is somebody with a putrid record in activism, a disgusting record in activism, and no distinction in academic thought. But she gets honored. Same things with people like Leila Khalid, the PFLP hijacker. These people that the left has unfortunately particularly venerated are people who've been venerated not in spite of having a history of violence and connections with violence, but as if that frisson of violence is part of the thrill, part of the reason to promote them. And I think that just as I would expect the right to have a look at itself if it was marinating in those waters, so I think the left really should, and again, especially after the assassination of Charlie Kirk, really should look at what it has been encouraging on its own side. And it should remember that instead of thinking that it's always the good guy, let's at least concede that violence can come from all sides. But if it comes from your side, you have a disproportionate necessity to condemn it and to make sure that the gray zone of violence isn't one that our societies are allowed to exist in, but that we have a hard no. The hard no against political assassination, whoever is the target. A hard no against the pursuit of violence in politics, whatever the aim that's being pursued. If we could do that, left and right could show a degree of hygiene on their own sides, then some good can come out of these terrible circumstances.
You're watching the Rita Panahi show, and it's time for Lefties Losing It. And I regret to inform you that she's back. Yes, the world's worst vice president, the word salad specialist who makes an art form of being incoherent. The inept Kamala Harris is back, and she's hitting the loopiest, leftiest programs to flog her new book. Here she is with fellow Lefty Losing It Hall of Famer Rachel Maddow, making outrageous, idiotic claims. I can only hope she was drunk when she said this.
A tyrant. We used to compare the strength of our democracy to communist dictators. That's what we're dealing with right now in Donald Trump. And these titans of industry are not speaking up.
Yes, you heard that right. Kamala called President Trump a communist. Yes, a communist. And she goes from slamming the president for being a communist dictator to praising an actual communist and endorsing him. This is what she said about New York mayoral hopeful and radical hard leftist Zoran Mamdani.
What do you think of him and his candidacy? And what do you think of mainline Democratic shyness and agitation about the prospect that he's going to win?
Look, as far as I'm concerned, he's the Democratic nominee and he should be supported.
Do you endorse his candidacy?
I support the Democrat in the race, sure.
Look, if you thought Kamala had acquired some wisdom, some class and perspective in the months since she was resoundingly beaten by President Trump, well, you'd be disappointed. All she revealed overnight is that she's a frightful bigot. But it's not her fault. It's everybody else's fault. Here she explains why she did not select her first choice for a running mate, Pete Buttigieg, because he's gay.
To be a black woman running for president of the United States and as a vice presidential running mate, a gay man, with the stakes being so high, it made me very sad, but I also realized it would be a real risk. No matter how, I've been an advocate and an ally of the LGBT community my entire life. So it wasn't about any prejudice on my part.
Of course, you are a great ally, Kamala, except you didn't pick Pete because he's gay, and you didn't pick Governor Shapiro because he's Jewish. I think we have a name for that. It just goes to show that even Kamala Harris thinks potential Democrat voters are frightful bigots. Now let's hear from Kamala trying to paint a landslide loss as close, so close.
And it ended up being the closest presidential election in the 21st century.
Poor delusional soul thinks it was close. She lost every swing state, she lost the popular vote, she lost the electoral college by a huge margin, but don't expect Rachel Maddow to pull Kamala up on her delusions. And it didn't get much better when Kamala sat down with the ladies of The View. She repeated that pitiful line about the supposed closeness of the election. And she seemed to have enjoyed a couple more cocktails.
This person and what we just saw in terms of a presentation at the United Nations, I talk about it. I talked about, remember in the debate?
Yeah.
They laughed at him the last time he was in front of the UN. This individual who occupies our White House right now,
The People's House,
has decided that he will be an emperor in his mind who will demonstrate his power by demeaning and belittling and making people feel small.
So Trump has gone from being a communist dictator to being an emperor. And Kamala has gone from happy hour straight to The View, it seems. Now let's go from the ridiculous to the demonic. This is just so ugly and wrong. Imagine how rotten your soul must be to do this.
Father, forgive them, for they not know what they do. That man, that young man, I forgive him.
Just demonic. Now let's hear from a lefty who thinks she's being awfully clever, but actually she's kicking an own goal.
You know you're a fascist when you demand law and order unless the law is investigating your favorite politicians. You know you're a fascist when you want to lock up opponents but pardon your own criminals. You know you're a fascist when you think elections are rigged unless your guy wins.
Who's going to tell her that everything she just said applies to her and the rest of the modern left? She just basically called herself a fascist, and the self-awareness doesn't kick in as this rant continues.
You know you're a fascist when you cheer when peaceful protesters are beaten, jailed, or silenced. You know you're a fascist when you wrap yourself in the flag while dismantling the democracy it stands for. You know you're a fascist when you believe one man's power is more important than everyone's freedom. But yeah, tell me how the libtards are destroying this country.
You know, it's almost cruel to laugh at someone that thick, but what else can you do? Now, in honour of Charlie Kirk, I thought I'd go out and talk to the hard left, talk to ideological opponents and see if we can have fruitful dialogue. Let's have a look at a little of what happened earlier today on the streets of Phoenix, Arizona. It started with nonsense about dictatorships and American citizens being deported, and then it got considerably worse.
They could literally pick me off the street and say, you're not an American, come with us and ship me away. I am an American, but how would I prove that without a court of law?
Are you suggesting that American citizens are being deported?
I'm saying we're next on the list, and they've said that. The administration has said we're going to go after some of the homegrown ones we have here, too.
What do you mean by homegrown?
Well, they're talking about terrorists and criminals that are imported, which is all, frankly false. But the administration has stated that they are going to go after the bad ones in America, right here, born and raised Americans who do not behave the way the current Republican regime wants them to. They have discussed the options of kicking us out to, I'm not exactly sure where.
Now let's hear this Democrat just casually engage in some democracy denial.
Well, there is no mandate because while it sounds like and looks like the majority of people went to him, that's not true. Most people didn't vote.
If in the midterms the Republicans hold on to the House and the Senate, will you give up this fight? Will you acknowledge that the people aren't on your side and you don't have the numbers?
That's a loaded question because right now what I think is happening is the administration is doing everything they can to influence that vote and to stop truly free and fair elections.
So they're already trying to delegitimize the midterms. Next, we discuss Charlie Kirk, and that's when this discussion really went off the rails.
People can worship whoever they want to, and if you want to worship a hate monger, knock yourselves out.
You saw Charlie Kirk as a hate monger?
I saw Charlie Kirk because he was a hate monger.
Can you just explain why you say that?
Oh, there's like 17 lovely quotes of Charlie Kirk talking about how black people aren't qualified to do their jobs, how women should live at home inside, and inciting his people to actual violence. Go out and exercise your rights, he will say, and let's go put some hurt on people.
I'm pretty sure he never said black people aren't qualified. He said he didn't believe in DEI policies. That's not exactly the same thing. In fact, he was saying if you see a black pilot, you would start thinking, are they there because of DEI policies? And that actually undermines those who get there on merit. So that is a DEI argument, not a anti-black argument.
No, you're incorrect about that. It is an anti-black statement because the only way possible in Charlie Kirk's mind for a non-white person to get a job is for other sorts of programs, which is absolute garbage.
No, he never said that. I've listened to what he said in that quote because that quote's gone viral, and he was very clear that black people don't need DEI because they can become pilots or doctors or engineers, whatever, in their own right, on merit. They don't need those programs to undermine their achievement. So when they actually make it, people wonder how they got there. You don't see the merit of at least that argument, even if you don't agree with it?
Well, that's not the argument Charlie Kirk made, and you're trying to whitewash it, just like American media. You've learned your lessons well. Good job.
You think I'm whitewashing precisely what he said in the context he said it?
Well, that is not precisely what he said in the context that he said it.
I've watched the video.
Quite a few of them, yeah.
But you characterized it as he thinks black people can't achieve anything, when
yes,
obviously that's
right.
not what he said.
No, that is obviously what he said. That's correct. Mm-hmm.
Well, do you think maybe that's your own bigotry informing your thoughts? Because that's not what he said. His words are clear. You can read the entire transcript or you can watch the video.
Yeah, watch the video like I did.
Okay, let's go to the tape.
I'll tell you exactly what I said and why I said it.
Okay, go ahead.
I said, so when you see a black pilot, you wonder, boy, is that person there because they earned it or because they were placed there? That's what DEI does. It makes you ask questions you otherwise would not ask.
But apparently our lefty losing it knew Charlie's mind better than Charlie, and he's not above patronising a woman of colour. I mean, these lefties can't even play by their own stupid rules. What context did he say that?
Do we need to contextualize racist behavior is an interesting question.
I would have said DEI is racialist behaviour. So, yeah, if you're talking about DEI and the impact it has on society, I would imagine, yes, you do need to talk about that.
I think diversity, inclusion, equality are certainly things that we should have. Why are you against them?
Why am I against DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion?
Yeah, which one specifically?
I'm against the entire DEI ideology because I don't believe, as a woman of colour, I need to have standards lowered so I can achieve anything. And I would never want someone to look at me and say, did she get there through DEI, which is what he was talking about as far as the black pilots go.
You're implying a lot of context that he did not have in there.
But Charlie was pretty expansive in his context.
Yeah, racist, hateful, all of that stuff. Yeah, expansive. We wanted basically everybody that wasn't a white Christian dead.
Charlie wanted everyone who wasn't a white Christian dead.
Yeah.
So Charlie Kirk would have wanted me dead because I'm neither white or Christian.
Absolutely. So it's really odd for me that you're carrying water for him. But, you know, we are still a free country. We can do whatever we want to do, even foreigners that come in and have questions. Well, we're happy to talk about it.
We've just paid tribute to Charlie's legacy in having respectful, peaceful debate without anybody coming to blows or causing violence. So thank you, Charlie. Thanks for that.
Don't thank you, Charlie, but thanks me.
Did you like his dismissive tone about me being a foreigner? They always show their true colours. By the way, I was born here, champ. And thank you, Charlie, for setting a standard we should all aspire to. Joining me now is political commentator and author Shamika Michelle. Shamika, tell me, was Charlie Kirk racist, as our lefty friends claim?
No, actually, Rita, I don't believe that he was racist at all. What I do understand, however, is that when people hear the truth and they're offended by the truth, they need to find excuses so that that truth doesn't apply to them and they don't have to take accountability. That's really all it is. So if they feel like if they can get people to think that he's racist or that he was a misogynist, then they can dodge accountability. But he wasn't racist or misogynist at all. They just don't want to be responsible and accountable.
You are so correct. And if they were making these arguments in goodwill, if they actually believed what they were saying, they wouldn't take his words out of context. They wouldn't manufacture quotes. They wouldn't go out of their way to misrepresent what he was saying and what he was for to try to malign him.
Absolutely. That's all that it is. I saw Don Lemon, you know, probably from CNN, you may know him, complaining about all of the messages of Christ and God that came through on the memorial service for Charlie Kirk, complaining. And I just said to someone, this is a man who understands that typical Bible believers don't think his lifestyle is okay. So he's just angry about that. This is Don Lemon and so many others just not wanting to change their lifestyle to fit the Bible. They want to change the Bible to fit their lifestyle, and that's just not the way it works.
Now, today, the man who tried to assassinate President Trump, Routh, was found guilty on all charges, including attempting to assassinate Donald Trump, assaulting a federal police officer, multiple firearm offences as well. Shamika, there were dramatic scenes in the court as the verdict was being read. Routh reportedly tried to stab himself in the neck with a pen before 4 US Marshals intervened and restrained him. His daughter, Sarah, then stood up and said, "Don't do anything, I will get you out. What the F? He didn't hurt anybody. This is not fair. This is all rigged. You guys are a-holes." Shamika, what do we know about this guy? Do we know precisely why he tried to do this? Did he get any assistance? There seems to still be some amount of mystery around this man.
You know, Rita, we have a saying here, and it's usually written in the acronym in all caps, FAFO. And that's exactly what happened to this man. You know, to just say it a lot nicer, you play silly games, you get silly prizes. And that's what happened here. He's trying to act as if he shouldn't get the time because nothing actually happened. Well, you tried it and you saw exactly what happened. We don't feel any sorrow for him at all. He FAFO'd.
Yes, and we're in the FO portion of that equation. Now, Shamika, let's have a look at what happened earlier today when President Trump and Melania arrived at the UN.
NATO airspace. Please go bridge again.
Yep, the escalator abruptly stopped just as the President and the First Lady got on it. Luckily, no one was hurt. It seems all innocent, except the Times reported on the weekend that UN staff members, and I quote here, have joked that they may turn off the escalators and elevators and simply tell him, that's President Trump, they ran out of money, so he has to walk up the stairs. And noting this, Press Secretary Caroline Levitt posted on X, if someone at the UN intentionally stopped the escalator as the President and First Lady were stepping on, they need to be fired and investigated immediately. Shamika, surely no one would be that stupid.
You know, we just lost Charlie Kirk, Rita, so I do feel like someone would be that stupid. I don't put anything past the people who see Donald Trump as an enemy. I just don't trust them. And I'm with Caroline. If someone actually did that on purpose, they need to be fired. So I wouldn't mind a small investigation into that at all because of just what we've been through. And we know that they tried to assassinate President Trump over the summer. I just don't trust them. And I think we need to start fighting back and being very vicious about it.
I'm telling you, if that turns out to be deliberate, they have to be... I don't think they can just be sacked. I think they have to be looked at some charges because it's just pure good luck that nobody was hurt with that level of stupidity. Now, Jimmy Kimmel will be back on the airways tonight, but not everywhere he used to be. The New York Post is reporting his show will be missing from dozens of markets after Sinclair Broadcast Group and Nexstar Media Group, which operates 32 ABC affiliates, said that they are not interested in having Jimmy Kimmel Live on their airways. This is all after he claimed that Charlie Kirk was killed by a MAGA supporter. Jimmy Kimmel would know perfectly well that is untrue, and he said it anyway, Shamika. What do you make of what's happened with Jimmy Kimmel? Is he eventually going to get back all across the country, or is this really the end of his career?
Yeah, I'm not sure he'll get back across the country. This may just be them allowing him to come on so it won't seem as if they caved, or it won't seem as if they took him off because of freedom of speech. Jimmy Kimmel's show is trash. I know that it's still going to be absent from my television just as it was prior to the boycott, but I don't feel sorry for him because I had to suffer through them taking Roseanne off of TV and changing it to the Connors. So this is what happens. And again, I just think that this is the beginning of the end because he's just simply not funny.
Well, that seems to be the key point. He's not funny. He has next to no audience and a massive salary and a massive team. None of it makes sense. Now, Shamika, I played some clips of Kamala Harris earlier on Lefties Losing It. She's been all around on Rachel Maddow's program and The View. What have you made of her recent media appearances?
The usual, Rita. I don't, maybe she should be a spokesperson for a vodka drink or maybe rum or something. She just never comes across very clear. It's always some sort of word salad. So maybe she can go and work for Hidden Valley because you would definitely need some ranch or some type of salad dressing to go along with the word salad that she always gives us. I mean, this is just usual Kamala. Nothing has changed except her address.
Well, yeah, you said it all right there and there, and yet she's still the front runner to be the presidential candidate for the Democrats in 2028. They've got such a shallow talent pool. What did you make of her claim that she didn't select Pete Buttigieg because he's gay? She could have had him as her running mate, but she said, I'm a black woman and I couldn't have a gay running mate.
You know, I think that's rich coming from someone who participated in illicit activities her way up So I don't know about Kamala. Again, I think she's just trying to get attention. I don't know about her being the front runner of anything. I hope they do try to run her again so that we can actually keep the White House for another 4 more years.
Now, Shamika, I want to play you a little clip. I've played tourist in Phoenix, and I just noted all the messaging we're bombarded with in our big cities. So much visual pollution, some of it political, a lot of it political. And here's what I found in Phoenix. Howdy, Sky News family. I'm in downtown Phoenix, and I'm looking at some public art. Some of it's good, some of it's bad, and some of it is downright ugly. This I like. Now, this is Mahsa Amini. She's a woman in Iran who was murdered by the morality police for not wearing her hijab properly. Her murder sparked widespread protests. Howdy, guys. Yeah. What can you do? Probably lefties losing it. As I was saying, this is actually a very base piece of art. May not look like it. It might look like some sort of woke bit of symbolism, but this is about the oppression of women, the oppression of gays in Iran, those living under Islam. I would like that to be a little bit clearer. So perhaps, I don't know, something like free women from the hijab, or solidarity with our sisters living under Sharia. Some sort of clarity around the piece of art I think would be useful and make it more powerful, but thumbs up for this one. Black History Matters? Don't like that. I don't like Black Lives Matter, because all lives matter, all history matters. If you can't substitute the word white in for black or any other minority, then don't do it. You wouldn't say white history matters. We've had the good, we've had the bad, and this is the ugly, and it's opposite my hotel. I'm going to ask for a discount when I check out because I have been traumatized. Why would anyone want to look at Kamala every day? I mean, what a insane thing to be putting up on a building. It screams failure, it screams incoherence, it screams word salads. It's not what you want to see in any city, let alone Phoenix. Do better. Shamika, I think I may have a future as a travel reporter. I think I can grow into that role. But seriously, what are your thoughts on this messaging around our big cities? Do we need to have Black History Month?
I'm with you. I think Black history is simply American history. It's just history. And I think that as long as we're trying to come together, we have to make an effort to stop finding reasons to divide. We've had Black History Month for the longest time, and I think it's just time for us to move on. I think we should actually work on unifying instead of trying to just keep being separate.
We are on a unity ticket there. Shamika Michelle, thank you so much for your time tonight. Andrew Cedra, we're at Turning Point headquarters here in Phoenix, Arizona, a couple of days after Charlie Kirk's funeral. It's been called a revival. Is that how you see it?
It's a revival. It's a revival. Charlie Kirk wasn't a conservative, he was a Christian. He was a Christian that's conservative. And that's one of the biggest points of tension about his life, why you saw the celebration of his death, because his faith affected his politics. He didn't do politics for the sake of politics. He did politics for the sake of faith. He didn't do politics to win elections. He actually did politics to win the next generation. He caught the heart, mind, but more than anything, he caught the spirit of the next generation. Gen Z, fundamentally, even though Gen Z are the most gay or the most socialist or the most LGBTQ they've ever been, they're also the most spiritually aware they've ever been. They're rejecting the notion that housing, food, Medicare will satisfy your soul. They're looking for truth, beauty, virtue, and morality. And that's the reason we're seeing a revival among the next generation. They fully understand that you're not a body that has a soul. You are a soul that has a body. And they're tuning into their soul. And that's the reason you were able to see thousands of young people crying, weeping, and celebrating the life of Charlie Kirk.
Well, whether you looked at his funeral or you look at the vigil here at Turning Point headquarters, there are so many young people. There's a real contrast between some of the left-wing protests we've seen in this country and what we've seen with Charlie. Is that reflected back home in Australia?
When leftists, something that happens to them they don't like, they protest and they burn buildings. When Christians die, we pray, we worship, and we go to church. And the line of character is too obvious. Like, if you have been claiming Christians are homophobe, sexist, hate speech, all this stuff that we get labeled, I get labeled all of that for simply preaching the Bible. The facts simply do not match what you're saying. We don't burn cities. We don't kill people. We don't bash people. We don't intimidate people. When we get persecuted and killed, we go to church, we worship Jesus, we open the Bible, and just like Erica, we have to forgive. In regards to Australia, because of the death of martyr, prophet, saint, Charlie Kirk, from a Christendom perspective, he died while proclaiming Jesus. Just a few moments before he died, he answered the question about who Jesus is, the historical evidence of Jesus. He's not just a conspiracy theory, he's an actual real historical figure. And he got killed in the midst of this type of conversation. And because of that, in Australia, our church, Echo Church in Sydney, we have seen more than 300 young people come to our church in the last 2 weeks.
And do you see that as connected to Charlie Kirk?
100%. It's not a coincidence. The biggest two surges in our church started 8 years ago. By the grace of God, we are on like 500 people a week. The average size of a church in Australia is 29 people, and the average age is like 50 to 60. The average age in our church is 25 to 30. The two biggest moments of revival we have seen in our church was after COVID lockdowns. Our church doubled. And last week, in the last 2 weeks, we had 175% growth. That's around 300 brand new people in our church that we have never seen before. Charlie Kirk was able to move Gen Z 10 points towards Christianity, 10 points towards Christendom, 10 points towards conservatism, and that is the reason Donald Trump won the election. Charlie Kirk won the heart of the next generation, and this is a very weird, funny way, because while he was preaching politics led them to Jesus. Very crazy, very inconvenient way, but if you have been a Christian for any length of time, God always uses the unorthodox way. He uses things that we didn't even anticipate. Who knew that the greatest political commentator of our time would also be the greatest revivalist of our time? So we are seeing growth in our church like never before. People are traveling 2 hours away to come to listen to the gospel. So God is not dead. He's more alive than ever.
We've got so many churches across the country that are really become political in their messaging. So many churches that have become woke and they are not exactly catering to that young demographic who's thirsting for direction and conviction.
The woke, liberal, infiltrated churches by leftism are dying fundamentally because the product that we offer is life, is faith, is freedom. When we mingle with the spirit of the age and the doctrine of the age and the wisdom of the age, wokeness and liberalism, you lose your message. One thing people told me, your traditional conservative Christianity will tear the next generation away from Christ. We are actually seeing the exact opposite.
Andrew Cedra, thank you for your time.
Thank you.